I love travel, and physiotherapy, certainly for me, has given me the opportunity to travel. When I was young, I had gone over to London to do my teachers at the London Hospital in Whitechapel. Because I was going to get married and go out to Australia, I didn't finish that course, but I was put on to domiciliary work in the East End. They couldn't put their local girls on when they needed somebody suddenly because of the perceived class differences. But me from New Zealand didn't have class things, so they gave me tube timetable, bus timetable, a list of patients and addresses, and a black box. And off I trotted. I had a patient in the Tower of London, I had one in Petticoat Lane. Well, I was trying to get across on the bus on Tower Bridge when it opened and let ships go by. It was the best job I've ever had. It taught me that middle-class physiotherapy doesn't suit post-war working class. You couldn't say hang on to the end of your bed and swing your leg. There wasn't an end on the bed. I was taken to windows and shown where their bomb dropped. I was shown cracks in the walls filled with newspapers. So travel meant something to me. Okay, we got married, went to Australia. I did little bits of part-time physiotherapy. I wanted to travel more. Then I came back into the workforce in 1975 at Princess Margaret Hospital. And I think there was some rehabilitation conference in Israel and an occupational therapist going to it. And I thought, gosh, I want to go there. And the next physiotherapy conference, and this was in the early days of WCPT, was advertised to be in Tel Aviv in Israel. My God, I'm going. Yes, this opportunity came after I'd had a few months in Atlanta, Georgia, studying biofeedback techniques with John Basmajian. So I had something to talk about at a conference because this was still a very new concept. And I'd had a wonderful time learning from Basmajian. So I managed to get a grant. The Pikal Trust I applied to. I'd been at school with one of the Pikal girls. I was interviewed by Dr. Hodge, and he said, "You're the first physiotherapist I've heard of who's interested in research." Because I'd been telling him what I'd been learning about with biofeedback, how I wanted to learn more. So I got money and off I went. There were some other New Zealand physios over there, Barbara Miller, who I'd been at school with. I think Margaret Draper was there. There was one man there who'd been invited to give a lead lecture, and it was wonderful. I hadn't really had much concept of physiotherapy, but get these people from around the world, and I had to believe that physiotherapy was some sort of entity. There was something. And at that conference, I heard the first research paper given by a physiotherapist. She was from North America somewhere, and she presented a study of some sort of treatment with stroke patients. I remember that so clearly, the first one. And the president of American Physical Therapy Society, he gave a paper talking about the different forms of measurement. So it was the very beginning of science coming in, and I was inspired by that. They had good workshops and things you could visit and see. Okay, so then I started thinking, well, this is all right. And the next one's going to be in Stockholm. Now, when we'd been on leave earlier, my husband was doing some study leave in Norway, and I'd worked there. So I wanted to get to Stockholm. I think by the stage I'd left the hospital, was started on my MSc. Perhaps I'd finished I might have been getting close to finishing it, but I didn't have any money because I wasn't working. Somehow or other I managed to get a loan from some insurance company and trotted off. Now, I was treated as an honoured overseas guest, and I was billeted in a most beautiful home, and I had a daughter wanting to travel, so she was travelling a different way around the world, but we met there. And it was so wonderful being back in Scandinavia, lovely. And the people I was meeting there, by this stage I'd been working in the psych department. I'd been developing my techniques, with my body-orientated techniques. There was a physiotherapist called Gertrude Roxendahl from Gothenburg, and she and I were asked to give a joint workshop on body awareness. Now, she was doing a PhD, and she was fond of quoting someone as saying, put a person back in touch with their body, and in part you put them back in touch with reality. We did a good presentation together. When I'd been in Norway, I'd picked up a few Scandinavian words, And at one stage, I found, when the audience were very interactive, I found myself saying, "Slap av," which means relax. And then, of course, I got a great clap. Also, at that conference, I presented one of my earlier papers on pain. I think it was on my research on women having hysterectomies and pain. So that conference spurred me on. Oh boy. Again, I was starting to meet physiotherapists that by this stage, 4 years on, had PhDs. And somehow, I don't know what the motivation was, but I liked that. Now, I went to WCPT conferences in London and in Sydney. Not sure which way around, perhaps it was Sydney first. Always I was presenting work, and I always had plenty of work to present because, well, as I've said before, I was said by some not to be a proper physiotherapist. You can also say I was doing things that were appropriate but were different. So I always had work to present, and I liked doing that. I'd give papers and I'd also do posters. I like posters. It's quite fun if people come and talk to you when you're standing by your poster on duty. That was 4 WCPTs. I missed the one that went to America, because in the United States somewhere, because I was in India at that stage. But I went to the one in Yokohama, Japan. Now, to tell a story against myself, I had a race negative feeling about Japan. I think it was being a child during the war and hearing a lot of things. And at first I didn't really want to go to Japan, but I wanted to go to the conference. It was a very good thing for me. There were 2 Japanese families living near where I live, and local people introduced me to them. The father of one of these young Japanese women was absolutely marvellous to me. He came to Yokohama, he took me out to a classic Japanese lunch of about 10 helpings. I went to Tokyo, he took me around there. He was very, very kind. Then also, when I was going over to an early morning lecture, I found a coffee shop wasn't open, and I was wanting to sort of get my energy. I was giving a paper. And a very well-spoken Japanese man said, "Oh, look, lady, are you wanting coffee? There's another shop over here." I said, "Well, I can't stop now. I've got to go to a lecture." He had been in New Zealand. He was a New Zealand, what do you call people in the New Zealandophile? Whatever it was. He'd been out to New Zealand a lot. He'd traced a lot of the history of the Japanese and the war camps in New Zealand and so on. So the long and short of that was that he and I met after I'd finished my conference day. He took me out to tea and gave me gifts, and both these Japanese men ever since have sent me calendars at Christmas, and I have no hang-ups now. I'm so pleased. I've learnt that people are people and I can mix, and, well, this is good. Now, I went to one more conference, and that was in Barcelona, and this time I was talking about my PhD research. So always I had something to be able to talk about. I'd started by saying at these conferences I was starting to form a bit of a peer group. The ones doing science, the ones doing the PhD studies and so on. I also have got to know very well over these years Tracy Burry, who at first was the research officer for the CSP and now works for WCPT. I met her at these conferences, had dinner with her one night, and we have kept an email contact ever since. I know all about her children when they were born. We exchanged newsletters. And she's been a very inspiring person, especially when I was having trouble with my PhD. She was always supportive. So she was at Barcelona, but she was very busy that time. Jenny Pryor was there. She is a New Zealand physio I used to work with at PMH. She's got her PhD in London, but she was at Barcelona, so we talked lots. It's who you meet, it's what you hear. And it's the realisation of how physiotherapy has grown over those, about 25, 30 years. Well, I think I went to my first one about 1972. I suppose it's about a 30-year period. How physiotherapy has developed, how the research is, how they are bringing in so many aspects of other experience into their physiotherapy. They're coming across boundaries. They are becoming familiar with so many different methods of research, because research isn't just one thing. You don't just do a group of patients, have a control group, look at what happens at the end. There are so many things that are research. Well, anyway, I was starting to find this out. I've seen it develop. I've seen it come into New Zealand, and I am very pleased. I think it is a future. I'm still not too sure. Perhaps you can't define physiotherapy, but it certainly is a group of people who are helping so much with rehabilitation on all aspects of human life, not just a broken bone, but the whole person, the person and their family, the person and their community. So I think physiotherapy is broadening. I think it needed to. I think there's far more teamwork, there's far more overlap between professions. It's been an exciting life watching this development from my early training when the doctors said heat massage and exercise on every prescription form. Now there's a recognition that the physiotherapist, who's a specialist in this area, will decide on the appropriate treatment.